Beverly Hills Emergency.
Somebody killed my parents.
Pardon me?
I came home and I found them.
From the creators of Dahmer.
Okay, you have to shoot first so that you don't back out. Okay.
Based on the horrific true events.
When are we gonna do this?
Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, now playing only on Netflix.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, attorney and former deputy assistant to President Trump, May Mailman.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, May, how are you this afternoon?
I am fine here in Houston, Texas. How are you?
I am hot here in Cincinnati, where it is unseasonably warm and dry, but I am doing my best with the fan on high and fighting the temptation to crank down the AC a little bit lower, but we'll see how that goes. But I'm looking forward to doing the show with you today. And before we do get into the show, I want to just a couple quick shout outs. One, not to a new supporter, but actually a shout out to you, May, as well as to Jay, not from me, but from Wilmer, who says he appreciates your putting yourselves on the line in public in this volatile political environment. And boy, that's sure true. And he says it's very brave, and he wants to thank you and Jay for making the show truly bipartisan. So there you go.
Well, thank you to Wilmer. And it doesn't feel brave, but every once in a while, I do agree that it would be easier to just say nothing. But I want to thank you, Mike, for committing to having a bipartisan show. Nobody likes hearing things they don't agree with. It's eating your vegetables, but it is important to eat your vegetables. So, hopefully, I don't expect a lot of people to agree with me, but I think it's a good vegetable eating process to at least hear that there's crazy people like me out there.
I don't know if I'd go with the characterization of crazy, but the vegetable thing, maybe we could be like broccoli with a nice cream sauce or something to make it a little more, I don't know. But anyway, there is one more shout out I want to mention. This one to Northern Kentucky University, and NKU has been my sort of academic home for a long time. And the people there were really instrumental in making the Politics Guys possible. I mean, not only did I meet Trey and Ken through NKU, Trey being a former student of mine and Ken a colleague, but the folks at NKU have always been big supporters of the work we do on the podcast, which includes giving it pretty significant weight in decisions they had to make about me for tenure and promotion, because they really understood the value of what we try to do every week here on the podcast. And the reason I mention this is that the Wall Street Journal recently released its list of the best value U.S. colleges for 2025 based on cost and earning potential of graduates. And out of the 500 schools they looked at, NKU came in 29th. And that's better than over 94% of all those schools, just below Harvard at number 28 and directly above North Carolina and UC Berkeley. And, I've known for years, and my colleagues at NKU just do a great job. And I'm really happy to see that the work that they do is getting what I feel to be much deserved national recognition. So congratulations to NKU. All right. So, May, I think we'll start with a story we kind of would hope we wouldn't have to report on, but that second almost assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And I'll let you lead us off on that.
Yeah, it's funny. It almost seems like it's not news anymore. And yet a former president and the potential future president was almost killed again. And I don't want to emphasize the almost. I guess I want to emphasize the killed, because I don't know what we're waiting for. Like, how does this keep happening? How is this not part of the national discussion more. This is just fundamentally concerning and anti-democratic to try and kill political leaders. Like, this shouldn't happen in our country, and it keeps happening to one person. So Trump was on his golf course on the 6th hole, and Secret Service noticed a gun protruding from the trees, and shots were fired in both directions. Luckily, neither the president nor Secret Service was harmed. And Ryan Wesley Ruth was taken into custody. He's thus far been charged basically with gun crimes, so I think we can assume that there are going to be more charges brought. His political past / his criminal background is like he's a serial criminal, very long rap sheet, and then became very obsessed with fighting for Ukraine, went over to Ukraine. They say that he didn't actually end up fighting in the army there, but was just very exercised about it. And that appears to be, there's been no motive ascribed, but it does seem as though he thinks that Trump is some sort of Russian ally and is very against that. But, that's not the official motive. Nothing has been created yet. I think the major discussions after this are, is it the rhetoric? Should we blame the rhetoric for this keep on happening, and whose rhetoric? So JD Vance was pretty, he said, and I'll just, I guess, quote him, it's popular in a lot of corners on the left to say that we have a both sides problem, and I'm not going to say I'm always perfect, but to say that I'm not going to say that conservatives always get things right. But, the big difference between conservatives and liberals is that no one has tried to kill Kamala Harris in the last couple of months, and 2 people have tried to kill Donald Trump. I'm going to say that's pretty strong evidence that the left needs to tone down the rhetoric and needs to cut this crap out. Versus Whoopi Goldberg, stop this thing, she says on The View. Let's stop the both sides stuff because it's not correct. It is not both sides. It is one clear side. And you can point to many, many reports. You can point to all kinds of stuff that's been reported. You can pull it back. This is not us or them. This is you have got to stop what you are doing, JD, and what you are doing, Mr. Trump, because you are not helping the situation. So I think that has really been what started this? Is it the rhetoric? Whose sides is it? But there's a ton of other stories coming out of this too. Secret Service. So today, the House, in a 100% support, so fully bipartisan manner, passed a bill that would allow candidates to have the same level of protection as this current president. It doesn't automatically, it gives Secret Service flexibility. So who knows if that's going to do anything. I think there's some finger pointing at the Secret Service as well. There should be. How does a gunman get into this golf course? But yeah, I don't know, Mike. I guess my first question is, did the rhetoric cause this? And if it did, whose rhetoric?
Yeah, that the whole finger pointing thing I find to be so incredibly unhelpful. I consume a lot of media on both the left and the right. And I see a lot of extremist rhetoric on both the left and the right. I mean, on my side of things, so far to the left of me, the case has been made by, none other than President Biden that Donald Trump is, in effect, an existential threat to democracy. Well, if someone's an existential threat to democracy, if you are a deranged person with, mental illness, then I could see where you could take that and say, well, I must act as a patriot. And, we can find the same sort of rhetoric on the right as well from, like I said, right from the top. If you look at what Joe Biden has said in the last 4 years, if you look at what Donald Trump has said in the last 4 years. So to me, yeah, it's a rhetoric issue, but it's a rhetoric issue. It's an amplification issue with social media, of course, because this sort of rhetoric is nothing new. You look back to John Adams and Thomas Jefferson vying for the presidency back in the day. And the sort of campaign stuff, women will be raped in the streets and just all this awful stuff will happen if I forget which one of them is elected. But this is nothing new, but it's the amplification of it, I think, but largely through, social media. And so I guess I certainly agree that it's the rhetoric, but I don't really feel like telling one side, well, go ahead and just stop the rhetoric. That's trying to score political points off of this either way, I think is incredibly unhelpful. So that's my take on the rhetoric part. I guess on the sort of substantive part of it, the Secret Service, I'd say, well, part of the problem, I think, in Donald Trump's case is that he does a lot of golfing, and plenty of presidents have, but he does a lot of golfing on his own courses. Okay, understandable. But those courses have a lot of direct access to public roads, as opposed to, say, Barack Obama did a lot of golfing as well, but he did most of that golfing on military bases. And of course, those are going to be a lot easier to secure for all sorts of reasons. And so I think when you have a combination of a lot of very inflammatory rhetoric on both sides and a difficult job by a Secret Service, which I think in some instances, you mentioned that, Bill, the protection hasn't really caught up to where we are, and good for the House to approve this. And you get a situation like we have now, and it's, deeply, deeply unfortunate.
Yeah, it's funny because I guess I really do struggle with trying to both sides this and saying we all need to take down our rhetoric, which even JD said, I'll do my part. Because it is true that the end result is that it is Trump being shot at. And it's not even necessarily Republicans in general, like Brian Kemp or something like that, Glenn Youngkin. It's Trump. And there is this obsession, I think, with demonizing Trump, and he's a racist and he's a threat to democracy. Even there are people on the right, the Republicans that CNN brings on there. So, well, you could say he's a threat to democracy because January 6th, he proved himself to be a threat to democracy. But all of this is just like, okay, January 6th was embarrassing and was bad, and I'd like for it not to happen again. But like at the end of the day, on January 6th, the Congress did vote to certify the Electoral College results. Like, everything, I don't know how existential that is. And, maybe I don't want to turn into like this being a January 6th defense, but there just does seem to have been Trump derangement syndrome. Like, people just cannot get out of their heads, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, how much they hate Donald Trump. And that's why when it's like, oh, both sides, I don't know. This seems to be pretty like.
I hear what you're saying.
I mean, maybe you think differently. Maybe you think the rhetoric really is on both sides. But why is it that it is Trump that continually gets shot at? Why one person?
Well, I guess. And of course, I don't have all the facts, but I would say in this particular instance, again, Trump presented a more, what some might call a softer target from an operational standpoint if you're a shooter. In fact, on that day, his golf outing was unplanned, so the Secret Service basically had to make arrangements on the fly, which is challenging. So they had to move quickly and defend a very large, difficult to defend territory. And now Elon Musk he jokingly said, how come no one's taken a shot at Kamala Harris or Joe Biden? The answer to that could be that they are better at following the Secret Service's instructions on securing themselves. We don't know that because the Secret Service isn't and shouldn't release information on all of the people who have come fairly close to doing the sort of things that this whack job did to President Trump. And so, and again, so when we're talking about, is it something uniquely Trump? Maybe, but there's that guy in Alaska who was just arrested for threatening 6 Supreme Court justices. In terms of the derangement syndrome, you have that sheriff who said to people, right, they'll start taking down the addresses of folks who have Harris signs in their yard and, all kinds of stuff like this, like he called her, like a laughing hyena or something like that. So I think there's no shortage of this. And I think what makes Donald Trump a little bit different is he strikes me as the sort of person who's going to be a little more cavalier about what his protective detail would say because he wants to live his own life on his own terms. And that comes with certain unfortunate risks in a dangerous society. I guess that's my take on it.
It feels to me a little bit like, asking why a woman's skirt was so short after she gets raped, right? It's like, well, and this is what I felt like in a lot of the mainstream media is after this happened, it immediately was, and this is the Whoopi Goldberg, and MSNBC. So when I say mainstream media, I don't mean all of it, that there was, Trump started it. And I don't find that to be a particularly satisfying or helpful solution. And, maybe the solution is Trump has to cower and can't go golfing on his own golf courses. But I find that unsatisfying too. I think that Kamala Harris should have come out and said, stop shooting Donald Trump. Stop it. Like, as your vice president, as the leader of the Democratic Party, I am saying stop it. And obviously she doesn't speak for shooters, but Trump didn't speak for January 6th rioters. Like, at some point, there is some amount of leadership that is expected of you for the most distasteful portions of society, not even your party, just like of society, that it's your duty to speak to them. And apparently she called Trump and Trump said it was very nice. And she issued a statement, oh, violence has no place in our society. But like, I don't know. I just felt like it was all a little bit weak, but maybe that's all that's expected of our politicians now.
I think it was just sort of a blanket condemnation of political violence. And that's what I would expect of Kamala Harris or Donald Trump or anyone else. And you're right. It's in the environment we are in. Does that mean that our presidential candidates, our Supreme Court justices have to cower? I don't think so, but certainly they have to take certain measures. Like now, both Trump and Harris are speaking behind a much more of a sort of a larger enclosure, right, because of security threats. And it's great that the Secret Service is going to potentially be offering more protection to candidates, but it doesn't matter who wins in November. It's only going to get worse because if Harris wins, there are going to be plenty of enraged Trump people because there's no way that Kamala Harris can win that will be accepted by Donald Trump and the ardent Trump supporters. I mean, Donald Trump himself said, I think just a few weeks ago, if there were an honest ballot count in California, I would win the state. A state he lost by like 5 million votes, 29%. So there's no one's backing down. The new way to do politics is to double down, not to back down. And so this is just going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse. I don't know if it gets as bad as it was in the late 70s when bombings were just everywhere and political assassinations were just everywhere to a degree, like we're talking an average of a bombing a week sort of thing. But it sure wouldn't surprise me because this is the world we live in. This is the world that the rhetoric on both sides and the technology that we have to amplify that rhetoric is created. And like I said, it's going to get worse.
Well, that's somewhat depressing.
Yeah, happy note there. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Well, but go ahead. I don't know if you have any final thoughts on that, but because speaking of getting worse, we can talk about Springfield, but.
Yeah, I guess I'll just offer one, because you had mentioned that Trump supporters might not accept a Kamala Harris win. And I do think that if this election is razor thin, it's going to be hard for any side to accept the results because, the Postal Service has already said because of budget cuts, they're sending mail all over this country in order to route it. It gets slow. So if this is a close election, it is going to be very chaotic. Like, I think for the sake of the country, it needs to be a landslide. But even in a landslide, I do think it's not the Trump supporters that people should be laser focused on. It is, I think, that the Democrats having to deal with a Donald Trump victory twice in one lifetime, like I was in DC when it happened the first time, and there were windows broken. Like I was personally shoved on the way to try and get into work during all the BLM riots. It was really hard to leave the office because there was so much violence, graffitiing everywhere, looting everywhere. So I would not say that if Trump or if Kamala Harris wins, it'll be bad. I think you could make exactly the equivalent case for the other side as well.
Oh, yeah. Look, I want to be clear on this. I think no matter who wins, there's going to be a serious uptick in political violence by the side that feels that they were cheated. And no matter who wins, because it's going to come down to the wire in a few states. I can't see anything other than that. The elements on the losing side are going to engage in political violence. And I just hope that law enforcement will be ready to try to quell the worst of it. You know, last week's show, Jay and I discussed Donald Trump's lie about Haitians in Springfield stealing dogs and cats and family pets and eating them. And of course, as most people I'm sure know, there have been further ramifications since then, and none of them, as far as I can tell, being positive. There was this interview on CNN when he was asked to provide evidence of this dog and cat eating. J.D. Vance said, "The American media totally ignored this stuff until Donald Trump and I started talking about cat memes. If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do." Now, according to reporting in the Wall Street Journal this week, the day before the Trump-Harris debate where he made that comment, a staffer for Vance contacted Springfield City Manager Brian Heck and asked if there was any truth to the rumors about pet eating, and Heck told the staffer that those rumors were baseless. And also pushing back against false claims by Trump and Vance, Ohio's Republican Governor Mike DeWine said there was no truth to the rumors. He called them a piece of garbage that is simply not true, and that the Haitians in Springfield are there legally. DeWine added that employers in Springfield, when they talk about the Haitian migrants, they say, "We don't know what we do without them. They're working, and they're working very hard." And he added to this in the New York Times op-ed piece that ran earlier today, September 20th. He specifically called out Trump and Vance in writing, "As a supporter of former President Donald Trump and Senator J.D. Vance, I'm saddened by how they and others continue to repeat claims that lack evidence and disparage the legal migrants living in Springfield. This rhetoric hurts the city and its people, and it hurts those who have spent their lives there." Now, to date, there have been at least 33 bomb threats targeting schools, government buildings, and a hospital, all thankfully hoaxes, but they've, of course, resulted in evacuations and temporary building closings. And according to Governor DeWine, many of the threats actually seem to have come from foreign actors. So, May, it's been an ugly week in Springfield. What's your take on all this?
It's funny. I guess I am more upset about a open southern border for which there have been 11 million encounters, multiple more million gotaways, and untold number more of paroled individuals, which is a fake category of status where you're just kind of let in even though you have no visa. It's just made up. So that's what the Haitians are here under, which is a paroled status. Like, that to me is the number one concern. That is lawless. That is, I think, nation ending if you don't have borders, if you don't have a legal immigration system and the whole thing is gray area. That's the concern. And yet somehow the narrative is, well, I can't believe they said the pet eating. I can't believe it. I was on CNN, BBC, Canadian Broadcasting the day after the debate. Every single question. I was prepared to say Trump did a bad job on a lot of things. Every question about pet eating. It's like, why are we obsessed with talking about pet eating? Like, maybe I'll say it's not great. Like, I don't really know where it comes from. It's kind of a fascinating thing. Like, the cat memes are funny to me. But is that the story? Is that really the story? Is that like Twitter went nuts over cat eating? I don't think that's the story. I think the story is millions of illegal border crossings. And so it like this, I think when conservatives say media bias, what we mean is it's the ability to set the narrative. And the narrative is pet eating rather than the thing that's actually the threat to our country. But if we want to talk about pet eating, I guess I find it surprising that people are double, triple, quadrupling down on like no one has ever eaten their pet. Well, okay, I guess if you have no report of it, then you have no report of it. But that it just seems like a very specific thing to be so sure about. I'm positive that when you import into a town of 60,000 people, 15,000 Haitian migrants who have a very different culture, that there is going to be a culture clash. It might involve pet eating, it might not, but that's like there are going to be things going on that Americans are going to be very shocked about. And so I don't know, is there pet eating or is there not pet eating? I find it so besides the point.
I guess I agree with you that immigration is a serious issue. And certainly while the Haitian immigrants who are legally in Springfield under that temporary protective status, that they have certainly contributed in a major way to the economy of Springfield in a very positive way. Certainly they've strained, the inflow has strained healthcare systems, has strained school systems, and that is a very real issue, no question about it. And bringing attention to that issue, I agree, is important. Regardless of how you feel about immigration, that's important. But I think on the other, to understand maybe how many of us on the left feel about this, there are a lot of folks who would argue that, for instance, Donald Trump is too friendly with Vladimir Putin and too soft on Ukraine, right? And so I think that's a valid point, and I would agree with that. But I would not be okay if people on the left started saying, do you know that Donald Trump actually received the Order of Lenin, and he's been in talks with Putin to actually cede 2/3 of Ukraine to Russia? Now, that certainly would be a great way to focus on an important policy issue, but it would be fundamentally wrong because it's just creating facts out of nothing. And once you do that, then you've lost all legitimacy. And again, this is what a lot of us on the left see as part of a larger trend with Donald Trump to use, we would argue, is often dehumanizing language, the repetition of animals and criminals and all this sort of things. And anyone who would steal your family pet and eat them, well, in a country like the United States where pets, dogs, and cats are treated oftentimes as valued family members, that makes those folks sound less than human. And so you take all that together, and that's why I think there are so many folks on the left, myself included, who have a big problem with this. And so that to me is why it's a legitimate thing to talk about.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to take, for example, Dave Yost's tweet, who is the Attorney General of Ohio, and I would not consider him a MAGA all-star. He would have been a Republican pre-Trump. He'll be a Republican post-Trump. This is someone who's just, I think, a conservative. And his tweet from September 11th said there's a recorded police call from a witness who saw immigrants capturing geese for food in Springfield. Citizens testified to city council. These people would be competent witnesses in court. Why does the media find a carefully worded City Hall press release better evidence? And, that tweet does not say all of the Haitians are eating the cats, right? But it does say that you have this phone call and, rather than just like wholesale disregarding it, and this is geese, not cats, okay, but it's still as culturally inappropriate, I would say. And the fact that the media just all of a sudden said, if you mention cultural differences, you are a racist. And like, as you say, like you're dehumanizing people. It seems to like actually try and change something that is happening or like that is reported to be happening to minimize that. And it seems to minimize that in a way that's like a little bit gaslighting. Like, we know that there's a huge number of paroled migrants living here. We know that there is a huge cultural, like, there are things that we know. And instead of even acknowledging any of that, it just immediately goes to you're a racist. And so I think that is the thing that makes people want to just say, you know what, I'm going to post the cat meme, because like, you're not taking immigration seriously. You're not taking, not you, but like you, the ether, these types of reports seriously. And so you might as well just say people are cat eating, because if you try and thread the needle and are so careful, people are still saying, no, you're crazy. So that's, I don't know, maybe it's just an unhealthy atmosphere. But at this point, I feel like there's not a good faith discussion. And so it sort of like permits the discussion to just go to cat memes, because it might as well.
I get the logic. And when J.D. Vance made that statement, I thought, well, okay, that actually, from a strategic sense, I understand that. And I think, though, to me, there is a difference between spinning facts, between carefully cherry picking your data, between exaggeration, even pretty significant exaggeration, and making things up almost out of whole cloth. And again, I think a lot of us on the left see this as part of a trend. Like, for instance, Donald Trump recently said in a rally that schools are taking kids and sending them to gender reassignment surgery without telling their parents. That's just simply not true. Or that Kamala Harris was sent by Biden to meet with Putin 3 days before Russia invaded Ukraine. That's simply not true. That is a bald-faced lie. And while he might be trying to make a policy point in saying that, the fact that he is completely okay with just absolutely disregarding the truth, that to me is well over the line. And I don't care if it's Donald Trump doing it, if it's Joe Biden, Kamala Harris doing it. I find it utterly deplorable, regardless of party.
Yeah, but then why focus on this lie, which again, I think has roots in truth, which is there is at least a police report about taking the geese. Okay. So let's just say it's an exaggeration or it's social media gone amok, but there's roots in truth. But I think whatever. Okay. That's bad. When President Biden and Vice President Harris say that Trump is promising a bloodbath in this country, that he said it, that he is going to be a dictator. In his own words, he is going to be a dictator. Okay, if we listen to any of those things in context, we know for sure that he said that if you don't put the tariffs on, it's going to be a bloodbath, meaning like the car manufacturing is going to be wiped out. Like, in context, the thought that this is going to be that Trump's like going to slaughter a bunch of people is just absolutely insane. Isn't that more dangerous? Isn't saying that your political opponent is promising death? Isn't that more dangerous? Shouldn't that be the lie that we're focusing on?
I think we should be focusing on all the lies. But yeah, I would agree. I think that it was wrong of Kamala Harris to take Donald Trump's comment about the bloodbath out of context, knowing that it was out of context. I found that deplorable too. So yeah, absolutely. And again, I don't think I'm taking sides here. If I see it on the left, I hope I'm just as willing to call out as I see it on the right. So, and to me, the reason why we're talking about Springfield now is because if you look at Springfield, it's become very much a kind of the center point of so much of this stuff, because things are bad in Springfield. You have some of these groups unfortunately, extremist groups who've decided that this is where they're going to make a commotion, make a stand, because it's been talked about. And so there have been real consequences. Again, thank God, no bombs, but plenty of bomb threats and other stuff like that. So I guess my point is this sort of rhetoric, whether it's coming from the left or the right, more and more has real world ugly consequences. And there was a time when I used to think that at least we could expect that our political leaders or aspiring political leaders would not engage in bald-faced lies. But apparently that time has passed, and that's really sad. So there we go. So, well, we've gone from depressing to even more depressing. It seems like I don't know. We should have like a suicide prevention number here after this story. My gosh, it just seems. But I am just sort of, when I was trying to put together my thoughts to talk about the news this week, I've said it before. I find campaign season it's gotten worse. I mean, I don't know how many presidential campaigns I've seen now, but a few, because I'm old at this point. And I swear everyone gets worse. And it's just hard for me to just deal with it because I find it so disgusting.
Yeah. And, part of it is like, I don't know, there's a candidate selection problem because
oh yeah,
if you have to run on why your opponent is bad more so than why you're good, which of course I think is the effective campaign strategy. Negative, people remember negative more than they remember positive, so you get more bang for your buck for ads. It feeds into, I think, some people's natural, fear. It's like you're trying to suss out people's fears. So like campaigns are always going to be negative. But I think that when you've got candidates like you've got Donald Trump, who has flaws that people can easily pick out. And then you've got Kamala Harris, who, dropped out of the Democrat primaries because she was not a sufficiently good candidate there either. Like that picking out the flaws in your candidate is the easier path. I think that we have a uniquely negative time right now that, it's tough, but maybe that says something about our primary process. Maybe that says something. I don't know what that says, but I do think candidate selection is a real problem in this country.
Oh, definitely. We agree 100% on that. And, when JD Vance went on CNN, I certainly don't think that what he had to say did the campaign, the Trump Vance campaign, any favors. But I will say that I give him credit for being willing to answer questions in that form, a form that he had to know wouldn't be friendly. And the larger point here is that both Vance and Trump, but especially Vance, have been way more willing to talk to the media than Kamala Harris or Tim Walz. In fact, there was a story in analysis from Axios this week. Since Harris became the presumptive nominee not quite 2 months ago, she and Tim Walz have given a combined total of 7 TV or print interviews compared to, this is correct, 73 for Trump and Vance. Now, Vance has done the lion's share of this work, like 59 of those 73. But even so, Trump's 14, that's double that of Harris and Walz combined. And I think it's also worth pointing out that in calculating those totals, Axios didn't count appearances at places that have clearly partisan commentators. So there were like 25 interviews or more than 25 interviews Trump and Vance gave to commentators from like Fox, Newsmax, New York Post. They didn't count. There was also a Rachel Maddow Walz thing they didn't count. But pretty clearly, the strategy, I should say, I'll admit it, I was hoping that Harris would start talking to the media. Initially, I said, well, you know what? She's a new nominee. It came out of everything. She's got to get the policy house in order and all that. You want to make sure. And I said I was willing to give her about a month. Well, it's been essentially 2 months, and that hasn't happened. And I think I have a good idea as to why, but I'll ask you what you think is going on here before we get into my thoughts on that.
I mean, it's smart. It's smart campaigning, I guess. She's not good off the cuff. Yesterday, she had essentially the easiest interview of all time with Oprah Winfrey, who was at the DNC. Like, this is a support. It's not an interview. This is like a mutual admiration society. And it was not good. I mean, like, even Oprah, I think her face was like, we love our country and we want to do the things that bring us together in this moment in time where character is who you are. Like, it was just, there was nothing there. And that's the problem. She's, I think, a very nervous person. And that nervousness, I think, was good for her in the debate because it led her to prepare and have answers. You could tell at the beginning of the debate, she was not comfortable and was going very much back to her rehearsed answers. But then after the abortion question, she very much got her footing. But I think she needs that in these interviews because there's just something that doesn't click with the audience. She needs to somehow hit her stride. And sometimes she does not hit her stride in these interviews and it goes poorly. So not doing interviews is a good strategy. She was able to ride a media momentum. She was able to ride we're so grateful it's not Joe Biden momentum. Like she's a little bit younger. She was able to ride vibes. And the question everyone always thought was, is vibes enough? And I thought for a while, maybe vibes is enough. But the question is, who do the vibes need to hit? And the vibes need to hit voters in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Georgia. And these are probably not your Charlie XIX Brat Summer folks. These are blue collar people who would prefer to watch football than politics and aren't sort of bought into all of the vibes. So, at that point, what do you do to reach those people? And she's got to decide, do I do interviews or do I not? And I still think don't do interviews because it just seems like she's getting clips of her, viral clips that are face plants. So she does need to do something else, I think. So I think she can't just ride vibes. There has to be something else. But I still think that something else isn't interviews, which is not great for our democracy. It's not great for I think interviews are good, but they're not good for her. So I don't know. What do you think? Good strategy, bad strategy, vibes are enough?
I've been saying all along that Kamala Harris is the worst possible candidate the Democrats could nominate who wasn't Joe Biden. And I think this is one of the reasons for that. Given the fact that she spent most of her political career in California, she had to appeal to those voters, and she pretty clearly has some, or at least espoused some very progressive sort of things. And now that she is a candidate for the party nominee, she has to tack to the center even more so than, you look at her in 2020, and she is very different because she, of course, was trying to try to flank Joe Biden on the left, which didn't work. And so I don't think she has a good answer to the reason why she's tacked to the center on so many things, because you certainly can't say, well, I'm telling people more or less what they want to hear. I don't really have any convictions or not a whole lot, but that's not an answer, right? But I think that's probably the case of it. And that's not because I dislike Kamala Harris. I think this is largely true of most politicians, is having a lot of strong policy views actually can really get in your way if you want to be a successful politician. And so that's why I think in a way Donald Trump's been so successful, because outside of, immigration and trade, honestly, I don't get the sense Donald Trump cares about a whole hell of a lot. And so that gives him a certain flexibility, right? And so, I think it's a smart strategy. I don't know how well it's going to work long term, just because from what you said, there are a lot of voters who don't seem to think that they know enough about Harris and Walz. And so I don't know. But I guess what also intrigues me is why J.D. Vance is out there so very much saying things that, at least to myself and other people on the left, just sound like, wow, this might really help him with the base. But I don't see how this is going to help him with the sort of, undecided voters who maybe are trying to figure that out. So I would expect both sides to do a little more keep away. And so I'm wondering why you think J.D. Vance is on this massive media tour.
Yeah, and his media tour is largely media that I don't watch. Like, it's the left leaning. He does the Sunday shows. So you don't need to necessarily speak to everyone. You need to speak to undecided voters in a very small number of swing states. And I think J.D. Vance, coming from the Rust Belt, and I wouldn't say J.D. is the manliest man that I've ever met, whatever that might mean, but he certainly, I think, can speak to men a lot better than the Harris-Walz campaign. And so putting yourself out there, being tough, it almost doesn't matter what you're saying. It's that you're saying it. It's that you're unafraid, that you don't mind going into the lion's den. And I think I see that theme with the Trump campaign, which is Trump sitting down with podcasters that have a heavily male audience, JD being a dad and being unafraid and kind of being a little bit funny, a little bit irreverent. I think there's a masculinity attraction there. And I don't think it's a bad move, honestly. Men don't vote at the same rates as women, but maybe it doesn't matter what he says. Maybe it just matters that he's there. And and we'll see if men come to vote, because what's actually interesting about the difference between Trump 2016, 2020 is Trump actually gained in all the places you wouldn't think he gained. He gained minority, he gained female votes, but who he lost were white men. So those were the group that actually somehow fell away from Trump between 2016 and 2020, that some white men that had voted for him in the past voted for Joe Biden. So, maybe there is a play to go after that vote.
Yeah, I would think that Tim Walz has a sort of history that would potentially appeal to those kind of voters. I mean, football coach, service for many decades in the military. You would think that would be sort of that kind of vibe. And I understand keeping Harris away, because I agree with you. I have not found her to be very compelling on the stump. I get a sense of a scriptedness, of a nervousness. She does not come across to me very well. But Tim Walz, I think, would potentially be good at that. But I guess, I don't know, maybe because he does have, as governor, a little more of a progressive record, and they're trying to sort of push that aside, I guess, to a certain extent, which, again, makes sense from a strategy standpoint. But at this point, I don't really expect them to do a lot more media, as long as the polling sort of continues like it is, suggesting that they're doing okay. They maybe have a slight lead in enough battlegrounds to possibly squeak through. And they must be thinking that the downside of getting out there is just far greater than the upside right now, given where they're at in the polls. So there we are. All right. Well, we have time for, I think, one more story, and we'll switch away from campaigns and elections. Thank God. So in a widely anticipated move, the Federal Reserve on September 18th announced a half-point interest rate cut, and that's the first decrease in interest rates since 2020. And now that cut, again, was thought to be pretty much guaranteed. There were some people who expected a more modest quarter-point cut. The Fed also announced that there would likely be more cuts to come, with another half-point reduction likely by the end of the year. And the statement announcing the cut cited economic activity expanding at a solid pace, low unemployment, and inflation that's still somewhat elevated from the Fed's 2% goal as the reasons for the cut. And as expected, markets responded very favorably to the announcement. I believe an all-time high for the S&P. So good stuff there, though. In response, of course, Donald Trump couldn't say, well, this is a sign of a strong economy, and I'm glad to see it. He said, I guess it shows the economy is very bad to cut it by that much, assuming that they're not just playing politics. The economy will be very bad, or they're playing politics, one or the other. Now, the last time the Fed has reduced rates this close to a presidential election was in September of 1992. And that, of course, was a move that didn't actually end up saving the incumbent. At that point, it was George H.W. Bush, who lost the election to Bill Clinton. So, May, any thoughts on this rate cut?
I guess, as you say, this was expected. In conservative circles, it's obviously a little bit frustrating because it feels political. It feels as though you're trying to give the economy a little jolt right before the election, which I think is why people expected this would happen. Everyone knew right before the election. And so it's a little bit shocking that it's 50 basis points rather than 25. And usually this happens, I think, when there are recession warning signs. So, and I guess, and I'm not the economic expert, that there's never been a basis point cut that has not preceded a recession. So that's not great to think about that this is sort of aligning with recessionary trends. But I guess in the short term, it's, hopefully people can start investing in their businesses again, because the interest rates are higher than they should be. They shouldn't be zero, but it is time to get back to normal. And I was talking to some economists, and I guess the concern is you need to hold something back. Like if we are heading into a recession, there needs to be tools. You need to be able to do something in order to jolt the economy, or to, and if you're cutting 50 now, are you leaving enough room to do something later? Am I an economic expert? No, I'm not. Did I expect this? Yes, I did. But I guess I'm now at this point just looking at what happens next. And I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I think those are both good points. I think, though, that given where interest rates still are, there's still plenty of ability for the Fed to make further cuts if they need to. And at least most economic, the conference board, the sort of consensus view is that there's a very low likelihood of a recession, at least for the rest of the year. And so, I mean, I would say certainly you can never give credit for an improving economy to your opponent. That's just not how it works. And so given the universe of Donald Trump statements, that was not that's not up there with some of the whoppers. So, Donald Trump, of course, appointed Powell, but so I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it was the right move. The economy is increasingly looking better. And I think, of course, in general, that tends to favor incumbents or the incumbent party that's seeking re-election. And so that's obviously a plus for, at least somewhat, I would say, a plus for Kamala Harris. Though the big negative, and the reason why I still think that Donald Trump is more likely than not to win, is that regardless of how good the economy is doing, I just this morning I went to the grocery store. I'm doing all the grocery shopping myself with my wife away on a hiking trip, and so I bought like 3 little bags full of things. Of course, I use my cloth bags. After all, I am a liberal, but they're not NPR tote bags, but they are cloth bags. And 3 little bags were like $89, and it blew my mind when the cashier said the total. I said, what? And I looked through the things, like sure enough, $89, and that seemed impossible. And of course, there are a lot of Americans who feel the same way, because even if inflation is down, we can all still remember going to Kroger or going to wherever we go and those prices being a lot lower. And in the end, I think that's what's probably going to doom Kamala Harris. And it's great that the economy is doing better, but those couple of years of really high inflation are just, I think, going to end up being the killer, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you're for in this election. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, especially because I think the big concern with interest rates is it feels to me tied to housing affordability. Obviously, it's tied to a lot of other, just the cost of money generally. So borrowing for your car, etc. But housing affordability is tremendously bad right now. It is very difficult for people to buy a home. But this rate cut was already priced into and expected in the mortgage market. So it's already down from the high of 8% down to around 6 point something. So people aren't going to really be able to afford a home that they weren't going to be able to. So in that sense, your home is still expensive. Although Kamala Harris has promised like 3 million new homes. Like, why don't you promise 4? Why not 5? And so, you're not going to get the boost there, but you, as you said, still do feel the pain in the grocery store, gas pump, etc. So it might not it might not be as meaningful to the average American, although, the stock market just completely took off in the wake of this news. So if you're looking at your 401k, you definitely are a lot happier than normal.
Yeah, and I guess I would also say that if you were the Fed, of course you couldn't be the Fed because you're not a multi-member board, but if a person were the Fed, or if the Fed were actually interested in sort of putting their thumb on the scales politically, I would argue the time to lower interest rates would be maybe 6 months or more out, not like 47 days when they did it before the election, because these things have a lag effect. And so that's another reason why I don't think this is political at all. It may have political ramifications, but yeah, in any case, I would say it's good economic news for a lot of Americans, and that's true no matter who wins the election. And so I'm happy about that. And I think that means also that we can close on a positive note, which given how we started, I'm all for that. And so, but we do also have a few things that we didn't have the time to get to. There's an interesting IVF, depending on interesting or performative IVF bill that the Senate tried to pass. And we'll get to that on the midweek show, as well as actually some amazing bipartisanship that broke out this last week in Congress. We'll talk about that as well, and also take some listener questions. We got a bunch of those. And so if you are a supporter, you will get that in the full midweek show. If you're not, well, you'll get a little snippet of it, and we hope you'll become a supporter, and it's really easy to do. And you, as always, support links for the show are in the show notes or at politicsguys.com/support. You can find them there as well. And as a supporter, you get that ad-free full episode. You get all kinds of other stuff at different levels. It's including the opportunity to go on our Discord group, which is always a lot of fun. I've been probably a little bit more than usual in the last month with my wife out of town and looking for things to occupy my time. I've gotten a little weird at times, but it's a lot of fun. And I hope you'll consider that if you can. And if you can't, but you still want that full midweek show, just send me an email letting me know, mike@politicsguys.com. I am happy to get that set up for you. And whether you're a financial supporter of the show or not, it really does help us out if you can subscribe to the show and rate and review us on whatever podcast app you use, as well as share episodes on social media. And before we go, as always, a special thanks, as always, I said as always twice, I must really mean it, to our fantastic executive producing team, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,